This video is brought to you by Artistworks. Artistworks are part of True5 Studios, and they offer direct access to master musicians through their innovative online learning platform. Partnering with iconic musicians, they've crafted decades of industry experience into guided paths of online lessons. Crucially, there's an option to get personal feedback tailored specific to your playing via their unique video exchange. Get direct guidance towards your playing goals. You can use the code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of Artistworks courses. I think we're incredibly used to on YouTube seeing folks demo gear which they really don't have much of a connection with. I'm as guilty of this as anyone. Well, maybe not anyone. But, you know, pieces of gear that they maybe never intend to use beyond that one video, and maybe they will never use live, and things that really aren't part of their workflow. And what I wanted to do was a video about essentially my actual useful gear that I use pretty much every single day, the stuff that I really can't do without, and discuss some of that and show you basically from guitar to computer what are the things that I'm actually using. So of course the K-Line Stratocaster is generally my number one guitar, and this is probably about the only guitar that I definitely consider being an essential to me. The rest of them I could more or less, I think, replace. This is a K-Line Springfield. I've done other videos on it, and the pickups are Lola Dirty Blondes. Nothing else particularly remarkable. Give up on that word. And then I'm using Franklin straps. I like these. They're leather and they're wide, so you know, if you were playing other guitars like Les Pauls, they kind of spread the weight really nicely. The picks that I generally use these days are Black Ice picks. If you want a posh pick, Hawk picks are really cool, but I've started using Black Ice a couple of years ago, 1.5 mil, because essentially it doesn't need to worry me if I lose them. That's the reason I use those. Cable wise, I tend to use Loaded for Bear, or Boss makes some really nice cables. The only cables that I've had experience of that I don't really get on with anymore are like the Planet Waves and the Fender ones. Although they have lifetime guarantees, I found that they broke fairly often, and so for that reason I stopped buying them, essentially. And string wise, I use D'Addario, generally the 10 gauge. Other guitars that I think would probably count as things that I think are relatively important to me are the Gibson ES165, the Herb Ellis, but I don't really make money from playing jazz, so I guess in terms of being really essential, that maybe isn't essential. And then I have a Yamaha Transacoustic LS, which is my kind of gigging acoustic guitar. Not a fancy instrument by any means, but practical, gets the job done, and I find it quite inspiring, and I played it at my grandmother's funeral, so got to keep that, haven't you? Right, then following down the leads, generally I'll be using a Line 6 HX Stomp or a Fractal FM3. If I had to pick between any of the modelers, those would probably be the two that I would go with. In this video, actually, I was just using Helix Native, so I think if push came to shove, I could probably, for home use, move to just using plugins, and if I was to do that, maybe Helix Native would be my natural choice for that, because it's basically what I use, and then it's also essentially the most flexible of all the plugins that are out there. I do think it's important if you're gigging to have backup guitars as well though, or a backup at least. So I think probably if I was going to be gigging this, which I don't gig this because I don't want anything to happen to it because it's my favourite guitar, then I would probably get another backup Strat. I'm still on the lookout really for my #1 gigging guitar. I think Yamaha Revstar, PRS DDTSE, those are things that I really liked for that job. Even the Les Paul I really liked. So that's up in the air. But in terms of essential gear to me, this Strat, an acoustic guitar for working, you know, doing duo gigs and that sort of stuff. And then maybe as a bit of a, you know, treat to myself, the Gibson hollow body, which makes me zero money, roughly. When it comes to the live rig, the HX Stomp XL is generally what I'm using these days, and sometimes I've been taking the Keeley Tone Workstation alongside that. That's really the only pedal that I'm using regularly at the moment, and that's something I guess that I should say, that amps, these things behind me, and pedals really are not part of my general workflow. So anytime you see me playing with an amp, it's really just to make a video, or with a pedal likewise. I generally don't use these things, so not really part of my workflow. I thought that was kind of worth sharing, I guess. Right, then we go through this Loaded for Bear cable. So this is a balanced jack to XLR. That's what I use to connect to my audio interface. I think it's important as well to have doubles of a few of these things. So like if you gig live using this sort of cable, for me it's really important that I can keep that lead within my studio at all times. I say studio, bedroom, but you get what I mean, so that you're not having to search around for bits and pieces when you're wanting to make a video. Likewise with jack cables, if you've got a live rig, keeping, you know, some separation of church and state so that you're not scrabbling around looking for cables all the time. I think that's really important for having like a clean kind of quick workflow, which is important to me. Okay, then the interface that I use, and I have really no connection to this in terms of it, you know, being something that I recommend. It's just what I use is the Steinberg UR-RT4, and yeah, that's just a relatively mid-priced interface, I'd suggest. And the speakers that are plugged into that are JBL LSR 305s, which again are maybe like entry to mid-level studio monitors. As I say, I'm not particularly wedded to either of those two. They are just what I use. And by the way, I don't use all these as audio interfaces because I switch them out, so it's important that that's like a consistent part of my hub. Other things that I definitely consider, you know, Adam makes some really nice studio monitors. Focusrite makes some really consistently good audio interfaces. I think there are a couple of channels where you can, you know, if you start getting into their comparisons of audio interfaces, for sure the Steinberg UR RT4 is not top of the line or anything. So if you're looking for that sort of thing, I don't think they're a sexy part of the rig, but doing some research on that stuff is kind of, I think, important. Once you've picked it, though, you don't really need to worry about it anymore. Like, I don't go around hunting for the next audio interface. It's just a consistent part of my rig. Okay, and then going into the computer itself, I can flash up some of the spec on that. This really did make a huge difference to my workflow, because prior to this, I was using a fairly old machine. Lenny's dad, my wife's dad, actually, you know, spec'd this out for me and then built it. I think it was around £900, and then I realised that because I had a better graphics card, the monitor that I was using would no longer be good. So I think the monitor was about £300 at the time, which was a bit of a shock. But what this really did was meant that I could render these videos and in way quicker times. I think it went from being about an hour long to render these videos to about 5 minutes, which totally meant that, you know, I could just do what I do way quicker. The other thing is that it can run much better stuff in Reaper. Reaper is the DAW that I use, and so I actually wanted to show you some of the plugins that I tend to use. Native Instruments tends to be where I get kind of like the other band samples from. So my bass that I typically use is Native Instruments Reactor, and there's a synth in there called Monarch, and I use that for most of my synth bass sounds. If I'm using real bass sounds, I think they've got, is it Scarby Pre? Something like that. It's like their bass thing, so I program in stuff with that. And then on that bass chain, I would probably have an EQ. Sometimes I use the plugin SVT from the guys at Line 6 and Yamaha to kind of, you know, affect the fake bass signal. And yeah, then just EQ the bottom off of it a bit. For drums, I use Native Instruments Studio Drummer. I can't remember, I think I used the studio kit. There's like, there's 3 kits. There's Garage, Studio, and then Stage, or like Arena or something like that. But anyway, yeah, I used that kind of middle kit. And on that bus, I also have an LA2 type compressor. So T-Rax is one of the ones that I use. Sometimes Waves, which I think I have some dodgy versions of Waves stuff that has been on my computer for a while. But basically just any of that kind of LA2 type compressor will do the job. And I have 2 sets of drums, like parallel compression type stuff. And one has like a bit more of a bassy kick sound and less of the cymbals, and the other one is kind of, yeah. So that's taken a bit of tweaking, and I've got like a template that I use for this stuff. I also then have like an ambient bus which I would send clean guitars to, which has things like shimmer reverb on it, or Valhalla's Supermassive. I really like using that, that's incredible. Supermassive, by the way, is free as well, so definitely worth checking out. For piano sounds, I use Native Instruments Contact. And then on the master bus, I think I use a couple of EQs, but generally those are just set completely flat. And T-Rax also has this kind of mastering thing, which basically listens to a track that you liked the kind of EQ curve of, and I sort of apply that, and it happens to be of a Sleep Token, the tune Higher. In the middle part of that, there's a breakdown. So it doesn't really make much sense that I'm using that, but that is what I'm doing. And then also I use a loudness audio plugin so that I can just see, you know, where the loudest parts of the tracks are, and I try and keep that around or below, above -10 LF US, I think it is, just so that I'm not, you know, completely distorting videos that go on YouTube and Instagram and stuff. I think that about covers my workflow and stuff getting into the computer. Then also we've got the camera thing here, which generally I'm using this Panasonic Lumix. It's a cheap camera, but it's got a 50mm lens on it, or a 25mm thingy, and that's what I use for this, and a Manfrotto tripod. And also for this audio, Nuix sent me a box with a load of stuff in it, and it happened to have this vlogger microphone wireless thing, which I've got plugged in there, and that helped as well. I think that about covers my actual kind of essential rig. And I think it's really important. Keep it in mind that some of this stuff doesn't have to be super expensive, but there are some essentials, and getting this workflow thing nailed down, I think, is way more important actually than finding another overdrive pedal or whatever, especially if you're into like the recording stuff like I am. When it comes to recording vocals, which I sometimes do, I use an Aston Spirit, which is a condenser microphone. I also use that for miking amplifiers when I do use them. But I think that about covers my rig. So that's hopefully vaguely interesting to you. I just wanted to kind of talk about the things that actually matter to me rather than some of the things that I think are a little bit frivolous. You know, sometimes there's a tendency for us to focus on gear for gear's sake, but this is really like the essentials of my setup. I think that is everything covered. I hope so. Oh, the stand that I use, because I have a guitar stand which has 3 guitars on it. Is that Trident? Is that what they're called? Hercules, Trident, something like that. Oh, and also then I guess my live rig. So it's the HX Stomp XL. And then I use an old, like from the 80s, Mesa Boogie open back compact cabinet with a EV speaker in it. And powering that is a Henriksen Bud 6. And the reason I use that is because that has 2 inputs, which is also really useful for when you do like acoustic duos, because that can work as like a mixer for that as well. However, I think I could totally get away with using like a Seymour Duncan power stage to power that cab. That would basically do the same job for way cheaper. And I think maybe that's a point that's worth making on some of this stuff. Like, I think there's a bunch of parts of this rig, like the studio monitors, the audio interface, that you could basically do the job with more or less any of them. Likewise, I guess with a Strat, if you find a Strat that speaks to you, it just does the job, right? And same with the modeling gear. So I guess it's more about finding a bunch of stuff that you're comfortable with. So I hope that's vaguely interesting. That's the gear that I really need and that I really use every day. And when I say need, even some of the gear pieces are totally interchangeable. And I'd be interested to know what your essentials are if you've got a really cool setup. I do see people with way better looking setups than mine. I think mine is very kind of bare bones and pretty, you know, what's the word, utilitarian. I probably need a new desk, but that's probably another video for another time. Right, thank you for stopping by. Helix Native was what I was using in the intro. You can grab the presets in Gumroad if you want, and I'll catch you in another video soon. Thank you.